Hi, friends. Hello. Happy Thursday. Welcome to Craft Your Joy Live. I'm Lisa Hetrick. I'm super excited to be here with you today. I hope everybody's having a great week so far. I have a really fun technique today. I'm calling it an experiment, a Craft Your Joy experiment. So, it's a sketch and wash kind of technique with stamps. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to experiment together today. Again, just really taking a deeper dive into some watercolor techniques and using our stamps along the way. So I see some friends popping in. Hello. Hi, Dawn from Detroit. She's celebrating 38 years of marriage today. Congratulations, Dawn. Hi, Pamela. Hi, Cherie. Oh, love your hair. My hair's a hot mess today. And also, you're going to hear the sounds of outside, friends, because I left the windows open because it is beautiful outside and I like fresh air. Okay. Hello. Hi from Southern California. Hello, Rhonda. Hello, Catherine. It's great to see everyone here today. Okay. We're going to dive in because today's card project and watercolor technique is kind of an experiment. I had this thought, you're welcome, Dawn. I had this thought in my head about a watercolor technique called sketch and wash. And I wanted to see how we can implement that look and feel with our stamped images and create a card with it. The experiment is going to be interesting, right? Because it kind of feels a little bit like a hot mess when you get started, but it really is a fun washy-washy technique. And I'm going to show you some other sketch and wash kind of looks and approaches. So let's go ahead and dive in. We'll take a look at the supplies. All of the supplies are listed down below here in YouTube in the description that I'm using. I just have a minimal amount of supplies today, and let's just go ahead and dive in. Okay. I am using my Gina K stamp set Grow Through and specifically using this stamp today. This big honkin', it's kind of like a sunflower, kind of just like a really big open flower to create some patterns with. And I have some Gina K designs. I have amalgam ink and obsidian. I'm also using slate. Slate is going to be the color that we're using for our sketch and wash kind of feel. I have some passionate pink here. And the cardstock that I'm using today is Strathmore Ready Cut Watercolor. Most of you, I can see all these familiar names. You're not new to the channel. You know that I love using this particular watercolor paper for paper crafting projects. So I have that cut out already for today using a master layouts die. We're also using the passionate pink cardstock from Gina K, cut to an A2 sized card. What else do I have here? Okay, got a couple things in my little container here. We're going to be using some scissors for our sentiment. I've got some brushes, just some plain round brushes. Let me just dig everything out. Kind of have that over to the side. I've got some Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White because we're going to do a little bit of splatter. I've got some glue, some Gina K Designs Connect glue. I have my little picker thing here for my sequins. And then I have a couple different things here. These are watercolor pencils. And I'm just going to kind of show you some sketch and wash techniques before we dive into making our project. Okay, so here is the inspiration for the project today. And I'm going to bring in a couple other things to share with you. So here's the inspiration for our card project today. We've got this sketchy, washy kind of look, and I want to teach you how to create that look with your stamped image. And let me just pop this up with your stamped image and some watercolor, and just kind of getting this washy, sketchy kind of stamp and wash look. Now, we've done lots of washy watercolor techniques on this channel, but usually they are, we stamp our image like in an obsidian or an ink that doesn't bleed, and we're doing some no line watercoloring or some watercoloring. Today I wanted to kind of take a little bit of a deeper dive into kind of a little bit of a messier technique called sketch and wash. And it's really fun. It's a really fun technique for watercolor because you're kind of experimenting with different mediums and how they work together. So super, super fun. I see people popping in, say happy anniversary to Dawn. So that's super cool. Yes. And everybody's saying looking forward to the technique. So, and Susan, looks like Susan's here from Facebook. That's great, Susan. Hey, I never know who's popping in from Facebook, and whether or not it's actually working over there. All right. So, as always, along the way, just don't hesitate to reach out with your questions. I have tailored my lives a little bit differently if you've been watching the last couple times, where we're focusing a bit more on our watercolor techniques and kind of I'm teaching you a mini lesson in watercolor versus focusing on the A to Z of card making. So I'm going to pop a piece of watercolor paper out first. Just kind of talk to you a little bit about the sketch and wash technique and some ways that you can do it before we do our stamped project way. Okay, let's just go ahead and move this over to the side. Got a piece of watercolor paper here. Now, a couple ways to do the sketch and wash technique, and it literally is exactly the way it sounds. You're sketching, and then you're just taking that, taking your brush and going over those lines and washing it out. Now, these are some watercolor pencils. These are Albert Dürer watercolor pencils. You can use any kind of water-based pencil for this kind of medium. A marker is not going to give you kind of the same effects. You can even use a pencil, like a graphite pencil. I've got some watercolor pencils here, and I also have this pencil called the Sketch and Wash, which is kind of a fun pencil. So I'm going to show you a little bit about sketching and washing in watercolor. So if I drew out, let's just draw out this kind of leaf element here, right? Just this little shape. So this pencil is water soluble. So I can take I got a brush here, take a little bit, let me bring in my paper towel. Got my brush, bring in a little bit, and you can see how the pigment, the graphite, is just washing out. And you can take that and blend it out a little bit further. And you get that washy sketch and wash kind of look. What's fun about this technique is how we're going to recreate it with our stamped image, and how you can also see how I'm just kind of using that graphite as a watercolor pencil, and I'm just kind of using what's there and creating that. Super fun. I see you guys chatting in the chat about living close to each other. That's super cool. Love that. So in watercolor, if I was doing a painting and I wanted to add a little extra something to my painting, I would often do this kind of sketch and wash kind of technique. So again, these water soluble like pencils, this is called a sketch and wash. You could use a graphite pencil. You could use your Inktense pencil. See how they're water soluble, and you're able to really just kind of wash that color down, that graphite color down. What's nice about this technique for our stamped projects is that that black color, or even if you used a darker watercolor pencil, which I'm going to show you here in a moment, it helps kind of ground the whole card project, and it gives it a lot of texture, and dimension without that height. So here is, I showed the Sketch and Wash pencil, which is kind of super fun, but remember, you don't need this pencil. You could use a simple graphite pencil that you might have in your stash. Actually, I'm gonna pull out a graphite real quick. So here's a little regular graphite pencil. If I were to use that and try to blend that out, I could get that to move just a little bit. Some pencils are going to move more than others, but see how I can get that to move. Not as smooth as that, but it's pretty cool using it. So here is here's an Albrecht Dürer. These are just some watercolor pencils. So if I wanted to do a Sketch and Wash project, usually you're doing your Sketch and Wash with darker colors like blacks and grays. And then the beauty of the Sketch and Wash is adding a little bit of color to your project. Look at that black. That black is intense. I tend to stick more towards the gray, the grayer like colors. So here's a red, which is kind of fun. But a little Sketch and Wash project is mostly gray, washed out with color added. And now I'm gonna talk about how we can walk through that Sketch and Wash kind of look for our stamping projects using your dye-based inks. So Dawn just shared, actually, I have graphite pencils and never knew I could use them for watercolor. Yes, you totally can, which is super fun. Here are some other examples I'm going to bring in of like some sketchy and wash kind of looks. See how I've got that sketchy look and that washy look. It looks a little kind of messy and bloomy, but that's okay. These are the really fun. These are kind of like the experiments that I did working up to this look and feel, like working up to this look and feel. Okay. Susan just said, I have the Inktense pencils that you've used and I love them. That's fantastic. I love that. I love hearing that. Okay, now we're going to replicate this Sketch and Wash look. Let's get a quick drink here and replicate this look and feel. I also need to bring in my heat tool, which I've left over here, so excuse me. Okay. Heat tool all the way over on the other side. That's no fun. So yeah, gonna need the heat tool. Like I said, today's tutorial came from an idea of me wanting to do a Sketch and Wash. I was actually doing a Sketch and Wash kind of painting in a sketchbook, and I'm like, hey, I think this would be cool if we try to do it with our stamped images. Let's experiment and do that and see what we can do. Okay, so I'm gonna get started. I've got this big honkin' bloom from the Grow Through stamp set. I love this stamp set. This is in my Gina K line. I just love it. It's got that sentiment, grow through what you go through. Just breathe. It's just a super fun kind of abstract like stamp set. Now, I've got my slate, and I also have a paper towel because I'm going to do a little bit of a stamping off. So I'm going to ink up, just kind of press my stamp in here gently, ink this up a little bit, and I've got a little bit of water, and I'm just going to hit it, little mister, just hit it a little bit out from a distance. And I'm going to go in here, stamp, go here, stamp again. And I'm trying to replicate that Sketch and Wash look as if I have drawn it out with the Sketch and Wash pencil. I've got that last little bit of ink on there, and I just reactivated it with that water. Now, this whole thing is got that charcoal look to it, like that charcoal graphite pencil look to it, right? Now we want to go in and try to get it to bleed a little bit, get that sketch wash kind of effect. So we're going to do this part first. And the beautiful thing, and I've shared this technique before, with the Gina K inks, you can just go in and I'm tapping on just a little bit with the water here. Pamela just asked, did you miss the stamp or the paper? I missed the stamp. The reason why I didn't miss the paper is because I wanted a little bit of control here. If I would have misted the paper when I stamped things down, I would have got some spidering. And I really didn't want that to happen. So you see how with that slate, I've added a little bit of water. I've bounced my brush around and added a little bit of that water. And you can see how it's got that sketchy, washy look to it. Oh, I love it. And I know I've shared this technique before with, you know, an easygoing washy watercolor technique with your stamped images. And I've shared this with with color, with using some of the Gina K colors, like the eggplant. But I really wanted to walk this experiment out with you using the gray and just kind of get that sketch and wash feel. And we've kind of got that. So dark, a little bit lighter. And this last one over here is going to be like super light because I don't have, it's a lot lighter. My first impression of that stamp was a little bit lighter. But if I want, I'm dancing my brush around. You can see I'm just dancing dipping it in the water and dancing it around. I'm going to come up here and grab a little bit of this color. Just kind of toss it over here. Just toss it over here really lightly. Okay. Hello, Kathy just popped in. Hello, hello. Okay, this has got that washy, sketchy kind of look to it. But now I want to get a little bit of color in there. So here's two ways. I've got a couple things here to play with for our experiment. I've got a Gina K ink. I'm going to take some Passionate Pink. Just kind of put that down. Mash that down on my mat here. On my glass mat. Get that nice and wet. I'm going to use that as a watercolor medium. And I'm going to go into my areas that are wet here and are gray. And I'm just going to tap this pink in. Tapping that pink in to get that washy sketch and wash kind of feel. So my paper's still wet, my brush is wet, my paper is wet. This is that wet into wet technique. I'm adding this first layer of pink and kind of letting it do its thing. Just tapping it in. This is a messy technique, but the end result is this is pretty washy and kind of like creating a pattern or a fabric with our pattern here. And it's also that one layer card, which I love. Kind of not super digging how this is so washed out compared to my others here. But I'm going to keep going and just kind of experiment a little bit with what's happening. Let's see. Let's just take a little bit of this. Again, we are just full on experimenting with a sketch and wash look. I'm taking a little bit of that slate and popping it down here because I think I want to try to add a little bit back into the centers here. So this is one way to do it. And just kind of let it do its thing. And if it's running, like it's running a little bit, and that's okay. That's okay. Just pop this back in the center. Just kind of drawing a little bit of that color back in. Now, I want to, let's wipe that off because we'll know for sure that'll end up on my hands. Now I want to take it another step further. I've got some edges here that feel like a little bit harsh, so I've got a clean brush and I'm just kind of dancing around it. Just getting it like a little wet and washy. This one is just going to be a little washed out baby. It's just going to be. Ah, fun, fun. Dawn's popping out. People pop out, people pop in. That's cool. You'll always have the replay. I'm going to take my heat tool and just kind of dry this up. Okay. So you can see that my wash has faded back significantly. My color has faded back. And now I want to get some of that intensity. So I'm going to go in with another layer. I've got my watercolor palette here. This is my Da Vinci palette. Just kind of love this palette. It's just super fun. Been playing with this a lot on the lives. I'm going to take some of this rose color, just put it on this palette. I could go back in with my Passionate Pink, but I'm going to come in with this watercolor because I want to get it to be a little more intense in those centers and just kind of play around with it. So I'm cleaning off my brush and I'm going to come in and just kind of wet the area just a little bit. And then I'm going to start to drop in some of this color. Ooh, digging it. Okay. And you can see I'm just dancing my brush around. Cleaned off my brush, just dancing it around, letting it do its thing. I'm going to come into my center one here and just kind of add a little bit of water. Pick up some of that rose watercolor. Drop it in and let it do its thing. Clean off my brush. And then just kind of tap, 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 tap. Tap around. Just kind of coaxing that color around and tapping it out. If it gets to be like too pulled up, I'm just going with a little paper towel and kind of tuck it away. But you can see that we're starting to get that sketchy washy look. It's messy. It's messy, friends, but oops, I want to get a little water here. This little guy, this little flower down here is the one that's a little too light, but I'm going to see what happens when we add a little bit of that rose in and see if we can just tapping it out, just tapping it around, see what we can do to bring this kind of back a little bit. Kind of like it, kind of digging it. Kind of don't mind it that it's a little washy too. Now I'm gonna just kind of come in. I'm adding a little bit of water, clean water. You can see I'm just going around my edges here, and I'm touching the edges of my stamped image. Remember, we stamped those images in slate, and you can see that that color is still what you're still able to move it even after I heat it. So that's the beautiful thing about this. The water-based inks, Gina's inks, I love them because you can still move them. I'm going to tap in a little bit of pink here, just in the whites, in the wet areas. Just kind of move that around. Let that add to the whole mixture. This kind of has this whole pink and black kind of thing going on. So I'm digging it. Kind of digging it. All right. The experiment is kind of interesting for this sketch and wash. Now, I have it's starting to get kind of washed out a little bit, but that's okay. Because I kind of have hit all this with a little bit too much water, but that's all right. I'm kind of digging this very ethereal, washy kind of look and feel. Totally digging it. Okay. It's messy, but again, experiment today. Messy is good. Drying it again. I'm actually really kind of liking the way how this one is just kind of fading out a little bit, that we started up here. It's a little bit darker. It's starting to fade and it's kind of fading out a little bit. It's got a very mystical kind of feel to it. I want to go in with another layer. I want to get a little more intensity in that rose color in that center, just to kind of give it that little opportunity to pop even more. I'd love to hear in the chat, does this feel like a technique that scares you a little bit or kind of excites you to give it a try and just kind of be messy? It is sort of, see how I'm dropping this color in? The paper's a little bit wet. I'm just kind of dropping it in, and it's pretty intense. I'm going to clean off my brush. This technique is just kind of fun. Just super fun to just kind of experiment. And I'm always thinking about different experiments that kind of take us a little bit further with the use of our stamps and what we can do with them. You know, versus just some of the techniques that we know that are standards. Just kind of trying some new things. So this whole I'm loving the way that looks. This whole experiment is kind of exciting to me. It looks like everybody's kind of excited about it, which is kind of fun. It's just another way to use your stamps to the max. The stamps, in my opinion, are always the star of the show. I'm coming in around this center. My brush is wet, the paper is dry, and I'm just adding in a little bit of that rose in that center. See, I'm just adding it in there. It's just kind of fun. Catherine just shared, I like the dropping and tapping to get the flow. Yes, super simple. I'm all about those brush stroke. Make that brush work for you. The brush is clean. You can see I'm just going tap, tap, tap around those edges, just kind of coaxing that color out a little bit and letting it do its thing. Remember, watercolor will only go where the water is. It's a flowy medium. I see everybody sharing. I'm going to try it. Oh, I'm going to pop this one up. Marianne just said, gonna try it. I love the look. Not sure if it's my style. I tend to be a stay inside the lines person. I hear you, Mary. I hear you, Marianne, but you can do it. Again, it's an experiment, and it's helping us to look at our stamps in a different way, in different ways to try to use them. Different techniques. All right, I'm adding a little bit, just tapping a little bit of that rose in around that center of that flower. Even though that flower down there is really kind of fading out, right? Just kind of fading out. Let's see what this gets us. I'm digging it, cleaning my brush. Okay, and then just tapping it out a little bit. Tapping just the edges. And what it does is it kind of coaxes it out a little bit. Now, I'm going to let this dry for a second. I have something I want to show you. So if we're going to use, I'm going to bring this back in. I'm using, you notice that I've used the ink and I also used watercolor. I just see a little spot right there I want to tidy up. So I want to show you something about the inks. When you're using inks for a watercolor project like this, the inks are going to dry. They dry very, very fast. So you saw my tapping technique, right? Now with the inks, I got to work a little bit faster. And the ink's going to tend to stay where I put it. But I can get that technique to happen with the inks, and I can keep adding a little bit more. You just really want to keep your paper really wet and work fast. The reason why I did a combination of the inks and doing a little bit with the watercolor is that the watercolor will stay wet longer, okay, versus the inks. So if I dropped I'm able to drop in some of that color. I'm also able to get it to move a lot further because watercolor wants to move where the water is. Where inks tend to stay where you put them. And there are some watercolor brands that tend to stay where you put them. But I can also get a level of intensity that is far greater if I use a watercolor paint. But I like to share using the inks because we have all these wonderful inks in our stash, right? So here's just another way to get into it and use our inks as a watercolor medium. Love it. But you just got to work a little faster and you just got to keep things wet. But you see this edge right here with the ink? It's a little tougher for me to kind of get that edge to smooth out and blend out. I can get it to move, but I got to work faster. And once they're dry, they're really difficult to reactivate. Where watercolor, like once it's dry, we've got a little drying right here. See how I'm able to kind of reactivate that and get that line to move. So just some differences. Not bad, not good, just different, okay? Or I don't know if that's the right term. Not bad, not good. Just different. Just different ways to use what you have, whether it's watercolor paint or dye inks as the watercolor medium. But you can see that level of intensity in that rose color that I'm able to get. In order to get that with passionate pink, I got to keep layering it, which is fine too. Okay. All right, I'm coming back here and I'm kind of digging the way this looks. I'm kind of digging it. It's a little messy, but that's all right. A little bit, I'm just adding a little bit of water here. I don't love that I've lost some of the black in the centers here, so I'm going to try to recover. Got a little bit of that slate. Again, experimenting. Going to take a little bit of that slate. I could take a black watercolor too, but I'm just going to go ahead and work with the slate. Just kind of pop it in. I've got it on the very tip of my brush, and I'm just popping it in. You can hear the cars going by. Windows open. It's a beautiful day. Just popping it in, just dropping a little bit in. Very random, just to kind of add that. Now, I could recover by just using this stamp and stamping it back in the center, but I'm just going to work with what we've got here. And just kind of pop that around. Okay, just kind of leave that be. Just kind of, I tend to overwork things, so I'm just going to leave this be. So Catherine just said the paints are more vibrant. Is that always true with this technique? With the sketch and wash technique, that's such a great question. I am going to pop myself back on the camera. With the sketch and wash technique, what happens with whether you're using your inks or you're using your water soluble pencils is that that's always going to wash away and give you that light gray or that grayish black. Or if you're using a colored sketch and wash kind of, it's just going to give you that lighter version. If you're using watercolor paint, because I'm layering them, we've done like 3 layers, that vibrancy, that luminosity is starting to pop up and come through. So that's absolutely what is happening with the watercolor. It's a different medium. It has pigment in it versus dye that is in our dye inks. So our dye inks are going to go where we put them. If we keep them wet and move them around and keep moving them, they also are going to get lighter and lighter. Now, you could dry it and you could glaze again, do some more layering and layer over top. But working with our dye inks, it's just, I would say it's you can get some of the same effects in vibrancy. It's just going to take you a little bit longer. And because we have our dye inks in our stash, I'm just trying to share all the different kinds of other ways you can get this sketch and wash kind of washy kind of feel to it. So I hope that answered your question. And I feel like I got a little bit geeky there, which happens a lot. So, okay, we're back to this piece right here. Kind of digging it. This is very faint. Susan's popping out. Hello, Susan. No worries. Kind of digging the way this looks. We're running really good time today because I knew this technique would be pretty easy going, not too complex. So if you have any questions, let me know. So all I've done is I've added some water in these areas because I just want to pop in. Look how messy. I'm just tapping this color in. Ah, good question, Catherine. Catherine just shared, can you use pigment inks or combos? So pigment inks are for mainly for embossing, right? I would say your pigment inks are going to be a lot like gouache. Okay, so last week we did that whole gouache tutorial. So pigment inks have white in them. Now you could use them to watercolor with them. So like distress oxides have uh, that kind of gouache-like property. You can use them to watercolor with them. They're just going to be a little bit different. The pigment inks aren't going to move and be as super flowy as using these dyes or using your watercolor paints. So, but again, experiment with them and maybe like, I don't have a ton of pigment inks, or I would just kind of grab one and pop one in here to just kind of show you what that would look like. But just experiment with them. They do have white in them, so they're going to be a little bit more opaque. And that may be something that you like or not like. So, okay, let's go ahead and pop down here. I just want to give this a dry. Let's give this a dry. See where we are with it. Okay, I'm digging it. I'm digging the way this is looking. I just added a little bit more pink here, just to give it a little more of that sketchy, washy kind of feel. Kind of digging this. So remember, like, you could go back in. So I could be fancy. I could go back in. I could go over some of these with my watercolor pencil. Like if I wanted to come back in and get a little bit of that line work back, I could come back in. I don't want to do it too much because I'm kind of digging the way that the ethereal look is. But if you felt like you washed it, I'm leaving this one because I really like how washed out it is. But if you felt like you washed out too much in your sketch and wash, look how easily you can go back in just with your pencil. This is just the watercolor pencil. I'm super heavy-handed, friends, so I'm just lightly going in and seeing if I could bring some of those edges back, especially. Marianne just asked about the oxides. So Marianne, I was just talking about that. The oxides have white in them, so you could do this technique with them. Put a little bit down on your mat and do this same technique, but it will have more of a opaque kind of look to it because it's got white in it, which makes them a unique kind of ink. Since we're doing this kind of sketchy washy kind of feel, I was just focusing on doing this technique with the transparent kinds of watercolors and inks. So I hope that answered your question, Marianne. Okay. All right, I'm going to bring this over and I'm going to get this on my cardstock here. I've got my Gina K. Let's just make sure my glue is going. I had a little pin in it earlier and couldn't figure out why my glue wasn't coming out. Well, I stuck a pin in it, so that's why it wasn't coming out. Okay. Just going to add a little bit of glue here. I like using this Gina K Connect glue, especially on watercolor paper, because I really do think it really sticks really well. And I just like it because I'm really tape runner challenged. I always end up using too much tape when I'm using a tape runner. You're welcome, Marianne. Okay, getting that down here. Yes, Wendy, this is a pretty cardstock. This is Passionate Pink. Because I was using those rose colors and this Passionate Pink, I really love Passionate Pink. I just love it. I'm loving the way this looks. I kind of wish I would have stamped these two a little closer together, but I'm not going to sweat it. Now, I've got my sentiment, and I stamped out Grow Through What You Go Through from the stamp set. Love that sentiment. Grow through what you go through. Oops, got a lot of noise, making a lot of noise over here. And I just stamped it out on a strip here. I'm going to take my scissors, and I'm just going to cut these two little things, like two little triangles in here, just to create kind of like a little flag. I could have used my die. I have a flag die. Could have used that, but I didn't. I'm gonna just kind of experiment with where I want this to go. Kind of like it at the bottom, but I just that would be cute. I'm gonna keep it down here, and I think I'm gonna cut that edge so that it goes right to the edge. Let's just go ahead and give this a trim. Now, here's just a little trick, and you probably already know this trick. This isn't exactly super square when I cut it. So I'm just going to take my scissors and just rough up the edge of that paper. And what that does is just, it'll take away the illusion of the fact that that paper's not square. Just kind of roughs it up a little bit. So it's kind of a nice way to not freak out when your paper, you didn't cut it straight, which I never cut things super straight, you know. Okay, I'm just going to nest this right here, and I'm going to use kind of like my center point, what's going on with that center flower. Just going to kind of use that as my little guide right there. Pop this down. Also, when you rough up those edges, it gives it a little extra texture and dimension. Now I'm going to come in. Boy, there's a lot of road noise today. I'm going to come in with my bleed proof white and add a little bit of white. Couldn't find it. It was hiding. So I've used this before. You can use white gouache. You could use whatever white. You could even use your white gel pens. But I really want to get these finish this off with some white to give it a little bit more poof. So I've got some white here. Let's just pop some of that down here. I've had this little jar for probably 15 years. And sometimes it gets crusty in there. And all you have to do is add water, and it'll come back to life. It is super fun. Bleed proof white. Love this because it is very opaque. So I'm just going to add a little bit, just tapping it out. This is kind of messy, and it's getting like all over everything, but who cares, right? Just tapping it out and kind of focusing a little bit in these areas where the pink is. Love it. Oh, I'd love to hear in the chat, like, who feels, like, how many people do we have with us today? We have quite a few. Who feels like this technique is kind of super fun and you kind of can't wait to try it? It's messier, but again, like when I started the live stream today, the focus today was just kind of an experiment. I had this idea. I wanted to experiment a little bit, so let's give it a try. Okay. Ooh, I'm going to stick my fingers right in there. I'm going to wipe this up. And I've got some sequins. Let's pop in. Let's get a few of these disco ball sequins from Gina K. I'm going to pop some of these in here just to kind of add a little bit extra to our project. Rhonda says, I'll definitely use the tip to roughen the edge of the paper. Yeah, I think that's a paper craft. Like, I learned that technique years ago, doing scrapbooking, kind of roughing up our edges and distressing them. I'm going to pop some dots of glue down, just random. Put one right here. Looks like I got a little big bloop of water there. All right, friends. So I have talked about how I've been redoing these lives, or just focusing more on the watercolor techniques and or artsy kind of techniques with our stamps versus walking through, here's how we make a card. And it seems like everyone is kind of enjoying this new way of sharing. 1, 2, 3, 4. I feel like I need one right there because I didn't connect those two very well. I usually like to try to connect my, let's get a small one here. Got my little picker. Let's pop a little one of those disco ball things right there. So I usually like to try to connect those stamps a little closer together. But I'm kind of digging the way this pattern is looking. We've got our darker sketch and wash, medium, and then we've moved to this really light wash down here in this lower corner. And I'm kind of digging it, kind of liking it. I'm hearing from you guys who definitely want to try this technique. People are loving the new live format. All right, here's the original over here on the right. Different kind of sketch and wash. Definitely a little, like, retained the darkness of the slate a little bit more than I did here. But I kind of really feel like this has more of that sketch and wash flavor. It's very sketchy, very washy. We used our stamp to stamp this image out. It gave us, it grounded us and gave us this place to just kind of work with it a little bit more. This is nice. This is washy. We've got some white, but this is really got more of that sketch and wash feel that I'm kind of digging. Kind of digging it. Okay. All right, friends. Let's go ahead and pop back to the front camera. That technique, sometimes, this is what I wanted to say. So sometimes techniques in our head, and when we think about them, like an execution of them, they're far different in our head than they are when we actually go to do them. So sketch and wash is a technique that I shared at the beginning that I do when I'm drawing and in watercolor paintings. And I really, in my head was like, oh, we could totally do this with our stamps. I've done it a couple different ways with color. I've showed you how to stamp your images in color and use that color and wash it out to give it that ethereal look. So in my head, I was like, yeah, we can do the sketch and wash. Let's use the slate. And we did. So sometimes experiments work out. They don't always work out the way we think they're going to work out in our head. And yeah, Catherine just said today's version seems more artistic. Okay, so yeah, this is sort of I would say like a mixed media, because I'm mixing a couple different mediums together to kind of use your stamps, further the use of your stamps, but in kind of an artsy, painterly style. So super fun. Okay, friends, I hope you really enjoyed today's tutorial. It was a Craft Your Joy lab experiment, right? It was totally an experiment that I think worked out. So, couple things. I will be back next week, either Wednesday or Thursday. If you're on my email list, and I recognize a lot of names, many of you are on my email list, you'll know because I'll send it out. I'll also put it out in social media. I'm always not 100% sure that people see things in social media. I share a lot of things in the Gina K Designs group, and I know people see things there. But I'm not 100% sure that you see my things in social media. So if you are interested and you're not on my email list, I'd love to have you join the email list. I share a lot of fun things in my email list, including when I'm going to go live, when my new Gina K releases are happening, and all the fun things I do in my online classroom. The link is in the description if you're interested in joining my email list. Also, I'd love to have you in the Craft Your Joy community, and I see many names of friends that are in our Craft Your Joy community. In my classroom at craftyourjoy.com, I have a free community, and I started it because I had a Facebook group and I was never 100% sure that everyone was seeing my posts in the group, and I had a lot of really fun things to share. So I started my own community in my own classroom, and it's free to you. And I also share content in there that I'm not sharing in social media. It's specific to there, and lots of freebies. And on Friday, if you're part of the community, I send out a little email to everyone letting them know what they missed in the community that week and what's new. So it's just my way of just growing our community together, sharing, and another way that I can serve you, including like I do here in the live YouTube. So, okay, friends, I am sending you into the weekend. I know it's Thursday, but I'm sending you into the weekend to craft your joy. I would love to see you try this technique. I know it might feel a little scary, but I'd love to see you try this sketch and wash technique. Get out of your box a little bit, get your stamps out, and give it a try. If you do, please tag me, share it with me, email it to me, post it in the community. I would love to see it and give you some love. So, okay, friends, have a fantastic weekend, and I will see you next week. And yay, I'm excited. Have a great week. Bye, friends.